Hello there, I'm Toby. I'm going to watch a Doctor Who story nominated for me by a friend. They've also chosen their favourite things about that story, one per episode and one bonus, so that we watch it in a positive manner to remind ourselves that Doctor Who takes us to our happy times and places. You're listening to Happy Times and Places, a positive Doctor Who episode commentary with me, Toby Hadoke. So it's time for episode 2, but first a quick reminder of who chose this story, what this story is, and why they chose it.
Hello, my name's Chris Boyle and I'm a full-time A-level law teacher and an incredibly part-time comedian and podcaster. The story that I've chosen is The Day of the Daleks, and the reason I've chosen that is because I do have problems with the Third Doctor. He should be my favourite. He's played by Jon Pertwee, he wears velvet jackets, he does incredibly complicated fight sequences whilst holding a glass of whisky, and yet more often than not I find him a bit pompous and a bit superior, and it gets on my nerves. So I'm going to see if I can find the positives in a Third Doctor story.
So, night is drawing in. Ghosts are around. Let's see if I can get through Day of the Daleks, episode 2, without 3 gorillas storming in and holding me at gunpoint. In the hope that that doesn't happen, I'm going to press play in 3, 2, 1, go. I can already this early in the podcast / video, I can see a theme developing where I press play and there's either a massive delay. There is a massive delay, and that time it's because it didn't actually kick in because the Blu-ray player is behind me because of plugs. It doesn't matter. I love this title sequence. Louis Marks, of course, wrote this. What an odd career he has with Doctor Who. He turns up and does Planet of Giants and has an episode lopped off. Oh yes, and the Dalek lady woman here, she actually fluffs. She says the same time zone, but because it's at the end of the episode, she's she gets the ignominy of fluffing twice. And again, if you're like Gypsy Kemp's character, if you're on the radio and you go, oh, so it's the same time, you can you get away with that because it's people stumble. In fact, people stumble in real life much more than they do in drama. But if you're a staccato alien wax lady, I think that's the one time you can't stumble, to add a bit of naturalism to proceedings. And of course, typically, that's when it happens, typically at the end of the episode. The shiny faces thing is interesting because if it was just the sort of waxy space future ladies, you could sort of go, well, they've undergone some sort of Dalekoid conversion, but the controller's quite waxy faced as well. It's like they're cosplaying as Autons. And of course that's weird, isn't it? The playing of the theme sting. Which is not something repeated before or since, which means I sort of like it because I like it when they do different things. Look at the depth of that set, the way that the Dalek set is positioned, obviously in the floor layout, which means that, because that's not going to be a whole set behind them, but because of the angles, it gives you a real sense of scale. And the size of the doors, which are quite small because they're Dalek-sized, but depending on where you stand, they give a different sort of feel. Is really interesting stuff because often Doctor Who uses height to suggest things that are imposing or scary or a sense of scale, whereas here, actually, those small doors well, they do give a sense of scale depending on where they're shot, but also there are times when the controllers sort of going through them, and they seem very small, and that makes them sort of slightly cramped and disorienting. It's what they do with scale in the set design, particularly in the future. The set design and the direction, working in synthesis, I think is really interesting. And then you throw in the vision mixing, where there are fades and there are cuts from, a shot of a person to that shot then being in a monitor. I think is some really good quality visuals. Now, here's the thing. Anna Barry playing a Nat. And she's done bits of telly going back quite a long way. But she was the daughter of... She's still the daughter of... Well, he's no longer with us. Michael Barry, who was the head of drama at the BBC in the 50s, responsible for hiring, among many, Rudolph Cartier, who directed the Quatermass serials, and who I will frequently ask people about working with in my podcast, as certain people have pointed out. Jonathan Morris. It's like, there's like a drinking game. If you listen to my Who's Round podcast, what was it? You worked with Rudolph Cartier, of course. So Rudolph Cartier, along with the words verisimilitude and beguiling, are ones that, if there was a drinking game for the stuff that I whack out to you, would probably be worth several tumblers full. So I will try and avoid them. But Anna Barry, is the daughter of Michael Barry. She was in a short film that won an Oscar a couple of years ago, The Silent Child. I watched it because it was about a deaf child, and I have a stepson who is deaf, and Anna Barry turns up as the grandmother in the film, which is lovely, and it won an Oscar. It's a beautiful thing. I think it's called The Silent Child. But and I've only noticed this because I'm watching it on quite a big screen, is that something she's mentioned in Linda Bellingham's autobiography, Anna Barry, as being a friend of Linda Bellingham, and as being someone who was in a car accident, and I think lost an eye, and had because her partner was a plastic surgeon, had sort of rebuilding, and I could see a little bit of a scar there. So that's and I'd sort of dismissed that, and I wasn't going to mention it, but it is in the public record because it's in Linda Bellingham's book. So I hope it's not prurient of me to mention it. I only mentioned it because I sort of saw the scar there, only very slight. She's a beautiful, striking woman, and obviously plastic surgery and things were in its infancy then. But there we are. So there's an interesting that I hope is not prurient. Whereas the extra behind the Brigadier's hair, the hair that lady has looks like it's been rebuilt by somebody with a lot of volume. And I think Anna Barry, by the way, is excellent as Anat, and she is exactly as I'd imagined her from the book. I remember seeing pictures of her and going, that's pretty much what I thought she'd look like. And she plays the part very well and very straight. And I started off this episode talking about Louis Marks, who had an episode of Planet of the Giants chopped after it had been recorded, which I think is never a good sign, and then disappears from Doctor Who for ages, then comes back and does this, writes a story that isn't about the Daleks, because this wasn't a Dalek story, this was a time travellers from the future story, the averting the disaster from the future. I love the lighting in this, and I love the lighting in this cellar scene, and so, he writes this story that doesn't have the Daleks in. And I think in the scripts, the Ogrons aren't called Ogrons. I think they're called Monster. That's a bit lazy. At least, come on. They've got some monsters. And they were supposed to be dog-like, which would have worked, I think. But I think the ape-like, gorilla-like thing, gorilla confusion aside, and they look so good. The costumes, going with the mask, look so good. The Doctor being locked in a wine cellar. And then Louis Marks doesn't come back to Doctor Who for ages, and then just two stories in quite close succession, Planet of Evil and Mask of Mandragora in the Tom Baker era. But it's an odd sort of he works for 3 different regimes, but isn't a sort of regular for any of them until the end when he does those couple for Tom Baker. And I alluded to before that there's various people who, when Doctor Who stuff is being prepared, sort of give their time to be a sort of network of helpful people. And this was the first time I think I felt I'd been any use, because an old friend of mine, Mark Patterson at university, had said, when, because all my friends at uni knew I was a Doctor Who fan, said, oh, my family know a guy who wrote Doctor Who, Louis Marks. I think Mark knows Louis Marks' daughter. So anyway, when they were preparing this DVD, I think they were struggling to find him. And Mark had befriended me on Facebook. And I like the shooting of this scene. Doctor and Joe are in the cellar, he said, conjuring images for people who are just listening to the podcast. I'll get this right, I promise. And Louis Marks, yes, they tried Louis Marks' agent, and his agent said, oh, I think he's dead. And I hate that when people just go, assume somebody's dead because they did something a long time ago, especially if it's somebody's agent. I think that's what happened, so I don't wish to be bad-mouthing an agent in case that was misreported to me, but they certainly didn't know where he was. And I think there was an assumption that he died. And I hadn't read he died, and I felt that was news to me, so I would investigate. So I actually dropped Mark a line by the wonders of Facebook. And Mark, I haven't seen Mark in 20 years, but he'd always ring up when I remember when Moss St. My Doctor Who scarf went to the West End, he just rang up and said, oh, you're doing a thing, well done. Yeah, lovely man. And he and I said, I sent him a message on Facebook saying, are you still in touch with Louis Marks' family? And actually he was, and they got a message to the daughter, and Louis Marks was poorly, I think, and living in Israel. But what that meant was that the residuals for this, which would have gone to, I think, an agent who didn't know where he was, actually ended up he was reconnected with monies that were due him. So I think because of that, I feel it might be the only useful thing I've done in the entire history of my association with Doctor Who is ensure that a writer towards the end of his life got a few residuals that he was due when certain people didn't know where he was. And of course he was in Israel because Mark, my friend, is Jewish, and the freedom fighters are called Anat, Boaz, and Shura, which are, I believe, Hebrew inspired or Hebrew names. And of course, that part of the world has, freedom fighting going on and sort of guerrilla warfare and various other bits and bobs. So, he was obviously, trying to evoke some of the feel of that, if not take on the politics of it. Yeah, so that's Jimmy Winston Ashura, who's just died recently, which is a shame because I would have. As I say, he was on my list, and Steve Broster said he was such a lovely guy, and Mark Ayres knew him as well. I think Mark Ayres, the Doctor Who composer, went to buy some sound equipment off this guy, and it turns out it was because he did sell sound equipment later in life. That was his job, and it's Jim Winston who went, oh yeah, I was in Doctor Who. But Shura in the book is, I think, a younger, sort of naive type of figure, a sort of young blonde guy, to give a slightly different dynamic to the three of them. But he leaps about, he's game, and I love this because I think this is where he gets got by an Ogron, isn't it? And he's got is he sort of Z free to Eagle? He's slightly Cockney. But this stuff on location looks great. Yeah, and there's a sort of tough sort of bit of spittle going on in that performance, but that's great. The way the Ogron's tower and that costume, they're great. They're great. I love the Ogrons. They're a superb addition to the Doctor Who universe. That's a nice shot through a bit of the set. Doctor Who directors are because it's science fiction. Well, no, I think because television at that time, because you were shooting, multi-camera, which you only really shoot a soap with now, and a soap would probably bulk at that sort of shooting. But with something like Doctor Who, you need it. And what I like about Doctor Who of this period is that a director will dictate the visual style and indeed the pacing and everything, and the music, the sound of it. The director, we as Doctor Who fans, can identify a Douglas Camfield story because it's probably shot a bit closer in and with, beads of sweat on people's foreheads and slightly sort of chilling, ethereal music and certainly an aptitude for toughness and action and convincingness in the rough and tumble. Whereas other directors bring different things. Paul Bernard, is clearly very visually very ambitious. Now, I very much, again, this was another bit I'd remembered from the book where, of course, the soldiers ring. So instead of giving themselves away, the guerrillas go, okay, we need to get the prisoners up. But the Doctor can't give anything away because somebody's holding a gun to him and Joe is under threat. So he does this thing, which is don't forget to tell the Marines. Now, as a kid, I didn't know what that meant. I'm still not entirely sure. Tell it to the Marines. It's something like, isn't it? It's an idiom. It's a phrase that means tell it to the Marines because the soldiers won't believe you. I think if somebody said things like, the moon is made of cheese, yeah, tell it to the Marines because the soldiers won't believe you. It's something like that. So, but what I loved, but without knowing the details of it, was that the Doctor had a thing that he could say that would mean there was a tacit understanding between him and the Brigadier, which would tip the Brigadier off, which is exciting because all right, he's held prisoner, but the good guys are coming, and the bad guys, they're not the bad guys, but the other lot don't know. I really liked the sort of the cleverness and the tricksiness of that without knowing all the exact details of it. And I remember this bit where Joe gets pitched forward to the future, and assuming that was an episode ending, because it's a big, it's a big development, and of course the mystery of the gorilla disappearing early on. But actually it's not. It's just another, this bit of progression for the story. Now that's bold because there's a fade there, a crossfade as the controller spins his chair around, and it's not entirely flush, but it works. And you're used to everybody having to freeze for locked off shots, but they go, no, we're going to have the controller spinning around and we're going to make that work. She'll be better off dead. Yeah. Oh dear, because she's in the future where everyone has a shiny face. And here we are. I can't choose him as my favourite thing, Aubrey Woods, and I haven't mentioned Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, although he's the Candy Man. The Candy Man can. And I knew he was a musical performer because I remembered, I think Jason Donovan was on Wogan. And then they had a few of the cast of Jason is Technicolor Dreamcoat, I think, that Jason Donovan was doing at the West End, and Aubrey Woods was one of them. And that tipped me off that, oh, okay, he's an actor, but he's also a man of musical theatre. And I think Barry Letts is quite hard on him on the commentary for this on the DVD, which is unusual for Barry Letts because he's a very generous man, very generously minded. But I think he felt that this performance was slightly out of kilter with everything else. But I think that's why it works. I think it needs to be. And I think if you've got a waxy face, you've got to differentiate yourself from the sort of down and earthy, sort of the gorillas who are the other guys who are a bit more sort of naturalistic and hurling themselves about. This sort of theatrical body language. I mean, he's got silver nails, for goodness sake. He can't exactly lounge about chewing the cud. So I do like Aubrey Woods very much. I think he's got great presence. And I also think he's very good at suggesting that the controller kind of believes what he's saying, and I think that the journey that he goes on is really interesting. He's also, of course, Crantor in the Blake 7 episode Gambit, which, if Barry Letts thinks he's a bit camp in this, but again, it's a great episode of Blake 7 that where everyone is dialed up to 11 on the campometer, including John Leeson and Bill Filer and and Professor Chronotis and Amelia Ducat. It's a veritable feast of Doctor Who types having a whale of a time. He's very precise in his movements, isn't he? Have I missed the bit? Was I chatting where he said, "Now you've told me the year," which is very good because I'm not getting into the unit dating thing. Is there a? I think there's a documentary on this called The Unit Dating Theory, which I ended up narrating because I was around and cheap. This is great because it cuts, doesn't it, it comes in and then it comes out and he's on the monitor screen. Love that. That's glorious. That's really fun. Although, again, it was wobbly in the last episode. I didn't notice it was on strings. Sometimes clearing up the picture can spoil things. I first watched this on a sort of grotty bootleg. It will have looked $1 million, albeit $1 million like it was underwater and 100 years old. And the sort of framing of the Daleks is nice there. I've just put my hand in my cup of tea, fact fans. The lighting in this cellar set is very nice. I'm presuming there's not much of it, but it's suitably atmospheric. And where better? If I was Jon Pertwee, I'd just free myself and just stay there for a bit and go, well, it's a lovely couple of little numbers here. Oh, there's a cheeky Rioja and a very avant-garde Merlot and a Malbec that's a right obtuse git. They look terrific, don't they? The Ogron was always played by Rick Lester. I remember in any picture from Day of the Daleks in Doctor Who magazine, it was always an Ogron, Rick Lester. You thought, and I'm sure when I saw the end credits, I was like, "There's millions of Ogrons credited, but it's always Rick Lester." Perhaps it was in his contract. There's a bit of a delay when, yes, I love Scott Fredericks, but his throwing himself on the floor after being hit by the door acting was like it was on a slightly delayed. They showed this bit on the news when Jon Pertwee died, and I was furious because the Nick Hyam, the BBC arts correspondent, you'd think would have liked the arts and television, and although television isn't counted at the arts, which is why people patronise it. But if it's so easy to make television that millions of people watch and that lasts for generations, you try it. I will come back to Nick Hyam because this is quite important. In the special edition, Greedo shoots first, I think, does he? I think it's such a shame. The Doctor, for me, is not somebody that disintegrates. Even lumbering, slow-witted, ape-like factotums of evil machine creatures, because he could have got out of that without killing the thing. And seeing as this is the era where the Doctor does lots of lectures to people about, peace and goodness and all of that sort of thing, and the Doctor generally doesn't take life. I know he often has his cake and eats it, and I know this is a fault with my own liberalism, and I go, no, it's very important that the Doctor doesn't kill things, but he does have unit to blow things up if things do need blowing up. He does have unit to machine gun. I don't mind the Brigadier machine gunning the second Ogron because it stops the Doctor doing it, and actually that's, and I'm aware that Doctor Who isn't necessarily the liberal show I see it as, because I know people who see it as the complete opposite of the Doctor being somebody who identifies what is evil and fights against it. and I'm aware my liberalism is paradoxical and flawed and sometimes contradictory, but I have to see it. I think we create the things we love in our own image, and for me, as somebody that is, I'm not a violent person. I'm a bit of an old liberal, but I also have to acknowledge, and I think genuine liberals do, which a lot of liberals today don't, is acknowledge that there are fundamental flaws or contradictions in our worldview, and I have to accept that I don't like it when the Doctor kills people, although in Doctor Who Adventures, the bad guys get killed all the time, even if it's once removed from the direct actions of the Doctor. But to see him just blatantly disintegrate something, I find very uncomfortable and doesn't fit in with my worldview of Doctor Who, which means that bit probably won't be among the things that I choose of my favourite things. I ran out of time to talk about Nick Hyam, the BBC arts correspondent, and Jon Pertwee's death on the news. So I will open with that thought. I'm going to leave you on a cliffhanger. I'm going to open with that thought at the beginning of episode 3, because now what I have to do is I have to see if I have chosen a favourite thing that is the favourite thing that Chris has chosen, and I'm going to choose the Don't Tell It to the Marines, just because I thought it was the Doctor being clever. I thought it was a way that the audience were ahead of the baleful force. Again, they're not bad guys, but the people holding the Doctor prisoner keeps him one step ahead of those other guys, which makes us as the audience complicit, and that's quite exciting. But also it's quite educational, because it's obviously a thing, but it also works without you knowing what that thing is. And I'm sure I probably would have asked my mum or something like that. So, and if that adds to the sum total of knowledge about the way we express ourselves, or idiomatic language, or metaphors, or whatever, I think that is all good. So, tell it to the Marines, Chris Boyle, because the soldiers won't have chosen the same things as what you have, or something.
My favourite part of episode 2 is a scene. The Doctor and Jo are dragged into the cellar by the keyboard player from the Small Faces and his mates, and the light goes off. And when the light is switched back on again, the framing of the shot is beautiful, and the sound design as the lines, "What do we do now? Tie them up," echo in the darkness, is excellently subtle. Superb little scene.
Oh, well, that's the end, yeah. I think I talked all the way through that. Sorry about that. That's going to happen. Sometimes the best bits I'm going to have chatted all the way through, but because this is an audio podcast, if I don't say anything, you don't hear anything apart from, the episode on in the background. So Chris and I did not choose the same thing, but I like his choice, even though I didn't fully assimilate it myself. Anyway, that is the end of episode 2 of Day of the Daleks. As I say, I'm tantalising you with, I'm probably going to have a rant about the way that Jon Pertwee's death was reported on the BBC News. But for now, that will involve a little bit of time travel. So as we can't be doing that, I'm just going to say cheerio. I was trying to do a clever tie-in with the time travel theme of the story, and I managed not to, so I've just spouted a little bit of nonsense. Hey, at least it proves it's live. Some sort of clever segue and some apt bon mot on which to end proceedings. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
If you'd like to hear a little bit more from me, but you are too old to enrol on the A-level law course at the FE college that I teach at, but you are a fan of trivia that's liberally punctuated with bad language, then you can tune into my occasional podcast, Chris Boyle Didn't Know That. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, and I'm sure loads of other podcast providers as well. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Chris Boyle downplays his comedy in his intro to these episodes, which is typical of him, but also wrong. He's talented, very friendly, somewhat geeky, and very engaging. And I know you'd be tuned in to what he's saying, so please check him out. He's also got a lovely singing voice, and he's putting various videos out there on top of his podcasts. Since recording his biog for us, he has rebooted and relaunched his podcast, which now goes under the name Chris Boyle's Mild Life Crisis. Check it out, you'll have fun.
I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find.
Oh yes, and "tell it to the Marines" is an English language idiom originally with reference to Britain's Royal Marines, connoting that the person addressed is not to be believed. The full phrase is "tell it to the Marines" because the sailors won't believe you, but only the first clause is usually given, standing for the whole. So I'm glad we've cleared that up. I mean, I did actually have to read that because I can't remember anything these days. Yes, I think you'll find I'm losing my marbles. Happy Times and Places was presented by me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest was Chris Boyle. The music for Happy Times and Places was specially composed by Dave Gates. If you enjoy these commentaries and would like to support them, and indeed all my other podcasts, you can find details of those at www.tobyhadoke.com. Please do so at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, where you can be a subscriber. You get special goodies there. Or if you just want to do a one-off payment every now and again when you're feeling flush or kindly disposed towards me, or you just think I might need a coffee, literal or metaphorical, please go to Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke. Your support is always appreciated. Please also rate these podcasts and tell all your friends about them, unless you hate them, in which case go somewhere that you like instead. Thank you. Doctor Who is copyright the BBC, and no attempt has been made to infringe that copyright. I just like talking about Doctor Who. Don't forget to subscribe to the official Toby Hadoke YouTube channel.